Hello and welcome to the LIVEcast, where today we are discussing surrendering to the story. Hi, my name is Glen Scrivener, and joined as ever from Crowborough today is the ever lovely Paul Feasy.
Greetings, hello. I'm not feeling very lovely, if I'm honest.
Really? How are you feeling?
But, yeah, not too bad, but I'm coming out of whatever this is that I've got, but feeling.
We
a
are
bit
unsure what you
blocked
have.
Up.
Yes,
and
yeah,
I am
what you
awaiting test results. Yes.
It could be the big one. Yeah.
I mean, it seems very unlikely. It's if it is the big one, I've had it distinctly mildly. That's for sure. So
yes, we're all voting that you're going to get negative. I think it seems obvious to us that you're negative. You've got negative written all over you.
All the evidence has been there for many years. So
it will be nice though.
Good to get medical confirmation.
Actually, we'll frame it and put it up in the studio. So yeah, neither of us are in the studio because one of our other team members actually did test positive. And so we are now isolating many of us are isolating until Wednesday, which will be 2 weeks from the day when we were last together with him. But he is doing absolutely fine, and everybody else is doing absolutely fine at Speak Life. Thank you guys for all your interest, and thank you so much for all the traffic we're getting online. It's been very exciting. I guess 2 weekends ago, we broke the 10,000 subscriber mark on YouTube. And then last weekend, we broke the 11,000. And then this weekend, we broke the 12,000. So things are hotting up on YouTube, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. It seems to be going very quickly, doesn't it, all of a sudden?
Yeah.
Very exciting.
So getting lots of people viewing and lots of people commenting as well. So let's do a little bit of mailbag before we dive down into our Tom Holland interview, which we released about 9 days ago, and discuss what he means by surrendering to the Christian story. But what kind of correspondence have we had, Paul?
Absolutely. Well, I think the most important one, obviously, to talk about is an email that I received personally.
Wow.
Although it was addressed to both of us, and I shall read it to you now. Paul and Glenn, I love your videos. I don't give a baldy. I'm from Northern. Is that how you say it?
Northern Ireland, yeah.
Is that what they mean?
Northern Ireland, a baldy, or Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland is the Northern Irish way of saying Northern Ireland. Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay,
yeah.
My
way is just of going har 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 hi har hi har hi. I love you guys.
Anyway, this person says, I don't give a baldy either whether Glenn wears a cardie or not. My hubby has some great cardies. At least Glenn's has some colour in it. Please, Paul, get yourself a cardie or a sweatshirt with colour so we can see you. I almost lost you in the bleak, dark background with your rather bleak, dark hoodie.
Just so negative. You've always been negative, Paul.
I was like, man, this is what I need, in a week where, the kids are off school.
Yeah.
We're
plague
sick.
Has struck the Feasy household.
Taking children for testing. I'm getting tested, and now I've got to worry about the colour of my jumper. I deliberately put on this before we started this. This is the most colourful jumper I have.
And you're very backlit as well. So
just.
You're popping from your background. I like that.
I apologise for my bleak, dark demeanour that I bring
love that
across.
they emailed you. That's brilliant. The most personal social media feedback I've ever had was when I was blogging back in the day. Do you remember blogging, kids? Ask your granddad what blogging was. But I wrote this thing about Richard Dawkins, who said something silly, and I said this was a silly thing to say.
No, surely not.
And I know, and so this is when I was on staff at All Souls Eastbourne. I still go to that church, but this is while I was still working at All Souls Eastbourne. Somebody had put a note into the collection plate that gets passed around on a Sunday, and it was a handwritten note, and it just said, Richard Dawkins is not, capital letters, not, underlined, a silly man, exclamation mark. And it wasn't addressed to anybody. The church treasurer kind of called me on Monday and said, do you know what this message is all about? And literally someone had tracked me down. They knew that I went to this church. They must have gone on a Sunday And instead of putting anything in the plate on the Sunday,
Wow,
they put
that's
in,
real commitment to the cause right there.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
instead of actually just flaming you in the comments, like, no, I'll come to your church.
I know where
And
you
I won't even
worship.
speak to you, but I'll. I know where you worship. That is brilliant.
Yeah, yeah. So that's my favorite kind of mailbag. My least favorite social media interaction, I think, was just this weekend with somebody who I kind of know and sort of follow from a distance, and I quite enjoy his writings at times. But somebody tagged him in a tweet that I had made and said, "Hey, so and so, what do you make of Glen Scrivener's tweet?" And he said, "Oh, I find it tiresome when people say X, Y, and Z." And so this is like the first thing I like I'm waking up on Saturday morning, and don't worry, I got into my Bible first, and I had my breakfast, and I spent some quality time with the children. But then when I got onto my Twitter, the first thing I get is this tweet that, you know, calls me tiresome from somebody I quite respect. So how do you respond? I just tweeted back a little GIF of like a child with a single tear coming down his cheek, like to express the, you know, the sadness that I had that, you know, somebody I respected.
Yeah, man, that stings.
Yeah. And then he tweeted back and he said, "That has to be the most passive aggressive tweet I have ever received in my life. And that's saying something." It's like, dude, I'm just trying to make light of the fact that you called my thing tiresome. Anyway, have a great day. Apparently he wasn't having a great day, but oh well.
No, obviously not.
It all got smoothed over in the end. After I insisted like 2 or 3 times that, no, seriously, it was just a little joke. I was just trying to make a good-humoured kind of response to the fact that you called me tiresome, but, you know, hey. And eventually said, "Okay, fine. I will trust your self-report about what your motivation was," which I do think is a good rule of thumb. If you're on social media, kind of just assume the person means what they say they mean when they tweet something. But anyway. A little lesson about social media interactions. Anything else from the mailbag, Paul?
So on the Tom Holland interview, someone said, like Jordan Peterson, Tom Holland is arguing what, as a Christian, I've always believed. The Christian message contains riches and comforts that transcend what pure rationality can comprehend. The answers to the existential questions of life presented by the Bible are far more profound than the barren and ultimately nihilistic perspectives of postmodernism. Will the church awake, appreciate what great treasures it holds, and turn back to its source? There you go. I thought that was a good one there. I thought it was good just because not only is he's obviously picking up on the good stuff Tom's saying, but I think that bit at the end there is something Tom had said. Tom was a little bit scathing about the church's response to things recently. Actually, Douglas Murray was a little bit kind of, I think, did he actually say like that the church were being quite cowardly of late?
Yes.
So there's a sense in which, you know, it's interesting that the people calling the church to be the church are not necessarily people who are embedded in the church,
right,
greatly or at all.
Right.
So
yeah, and that could tick us off a little bit. You know, you could think, well, you know, at our church we have amazing Zoom calls. They should tune in, or you know, like. And that's probably true. And you know, maybe your church is just doing the most stellar job of responding to coronavirus and the lockdown and all of that. But it's worth at times just taking the temperature of those who are well-wishers, who are from the outside and looking in. And as Tom said a number of times, he says, "I'm just speaking for myself, and maybe I didn't look hard enough to find good expressions of church in 2020. And he made a joke, you know, I've been playing cricket all summer, even on the Sabbath. So, you know, it might just be me. It might just be that I haven't found those expressions that I'm looking for. But, you know, it should be at some pause for thought that those who are wanting to find robust, courageous, faithful Christian expressions of hope in 2020 haven't quite been able to do it. So I think we should take that on the chin a little bit.
Although, interestingly, that just reminded me of a tweet I retweeted that I saw where someone had said, "Yesterday I chatted with a 21-year-old of no faith who wanted to know whether the media portrayal of Jesus and the church were correct. During lockdown, he'd started accessing church online and was amazed at what he saw, heard, and who he met. He felt he'd been fed a lie all his life."
Wow.
So, you know.
Yeah.
You know, obviously this season with church being online in some ways has been positive for people, and there is some kind of witness there that people are seeing. that's
Totally.
challenging their views of Jesus and the church, which is cool.
Totally. And it's still true that like Alpha courses and Christianity Explored courses are doing much better than usual. I think that's certainly still the case at our church and at a couple of different churches that I've been involved with that are launching new Christianity Explored and new Alphas just here in the autumn. And certainly we're finding that, as we've mentioned, with our numbers on YouTube, that, there are twice the number of people online daytime as there were this time last year.
Sure.
And I think that is translating into more interest in online mission. That is no substitute for face-to-face, in-person gatherings, and the church is meant to be gathered, 100%. But there are silver linings as well. Yeah.
Someone had commented on the Catherine Birbal Singh interview. That one's gone down quite well too. Fascinating. You should warn her. She's dangerously close to Christian conversion. She's halfway there with a solid understanding of the bad news. We pray she soon understands the good news. There you go. So I think that came off the back. She had a really interesting bit on original sin, didn't she, where she talked about that. So she's very much got this notion that there is this kind of thing in us that needs correction. Although I guess at the moment she's very much kind of come to our school and we'll steer you on the right path. But I think that's interesting, isn't it? Because I don't know if it's true of the last few years, but there's certainly been a period, hasn't there, where talking about sin is very very old school, considered to be not the thing to do. Why are we always talking about sin? Why can't we talk about love? Of course, you don't understand the bad news. You don't really know why the good news is good. So
yes, yeah. And there's been a bit of a renaissance of interest in original sin, because I think we've seen where Jean-Jacques Rousseau's theory has gotten to. Jean-Jacques Rousseau kind of preached the exact opposite of original sin. He said man is born free but is everywhere in chains. And his idea is that our natural state, is free and, wonderful. We need to release the spark that is within us. And it's the structures out there that get in the way, and we need to disrupt the structures and release what's within, which is the exact opposite of original sin. But I think we've seen where Rousseau's thinking takes him, and a lot of people are waking up and saying, "Oh no, hang on, maybe that vision of humanity is not right." And you go to a psychologist like Steven Pinker, and he writes a book like The Blank Slate, and just says this idea of us being born neutral and we're just blank slates when we're born, it's totally nonsense. And he brings all sorts of psychological studies to bear on that topic, as does Jonathan Haidt, as does David Sloan Wilson, as does a whole bunch of different people from the psychological point of view. And now I think a lot of people are waking up to the fact that Rousseau's vision is not right, and therefore maybe the thing he was reacting against might be right, to the point where you even get non-Christians like Catherine Birbal Singh saying the thing that sets us apart is our belief in original sin. What a thing to say.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, that I think both, not both, her and Tom Holland and Douglas Murray, I think, have all made reference to original sin in their discussions so far. So it's clearly something in there to be talking about.
Totally.
And then finally, one from the mailbag on our video, if phones were Bibles. Someone has said, and I just thought this was a great little comment, I think one reason we prefer our phones to the Bible is that we consider the Bible's content to be static, but our phone's content is living and active. If we really believed Hebrews 4:12, maybe we would reach for our Bibles more often. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting. That's a great little comment there.
Wow.
This idea that the Bible's always the same every time I read it, and I've read that bit already, so we've done that. I've completed the Bible, but there's always new content on the phone,
What a lie that is.
Yeah.
It's the same 12 friends on my Facebook feed, always the same ones, and I love them, but there's nothing new on your phone, actually, is there? Like that's the lie, isn't it? You think you're going to get refreshed, so you try to refresh your phone, but maybe the Bible is the thing that's reaching out to refresh us. That's the very good, very good. And if you haven't checked out any of those videos, especially that's a great fun one to check out. If phones were Bibles, it's Paul's star turn. A star is born. People will look back to that video and they will recognize this was the moment when Paul's career really took off.
Yeah, don't worry, I won't forget you when I'm in Hollywood.
The little people.
I'm happy to come back on the show, for an interview about what it's like.
Thank you. That would be really good. Give us the Feezy factor, just a little bump.
Speak to my agent, and I'll let you know.
So today we're going to think about surrendering to the story, because that was one of the phrases that Tom Holland used in his interview with me that we released about 9-10 days ago now. And I thought it was a terrific way of putting Christian faith. What is Christian faith? I think it is surrendering to the truth and the power of the story, letting the story be true. And Tom Holland, interestingly, he didn't use the language of faith, but he did use the language of, I've decided to surrender to the story. And we'll have a think about what he might mean by that and what he might not mean by that. But we've lined up quite a few clips for you from that interview. And I think the first one we've lined up for you is going to really give you Tom Holland's thesis from the Book of Dominion. What is it that Christianity has done to the world? He'll let us know in about a minute, and that will bring everybody up to speed on what we're talking about. For those who haven't yet read the book, obviously they need to go out and grab the paperback now, but what is the thesis in a nutshell?
The thesis of the book essentially is that Christianity is the most transformative and revolutionary ideology that has ever existed, and that in its distinctively Western form, it continues to completely saturate the way that people in the West view the world, not just morally or ethically, but on issues as fundamental as how they, the things that they take for granted about how, say, sexuality operates, relations between men and women, how society is structured, the nature of progress, all kinds of things that people might be tempted to take for granted and just assume exist out there in the sky, but aren't at all. They're very culturally contingent, and they're very specifically bred of the deep roots that the West has in Christian history and theology.
There it is. That was a very good elevator pitch, wasn't it? In 60 seconds. And I think, interestingly, on the weekend, Tom Holland gave an even more succinct version of that same thesis, just in a tweet. He said on Sunday, "If you live in the West, no book has had a greater effect on your life than the Bible. You don't have to have read it or even know the first thing about it for that to be true."
Yeah, I saw that. That was great.
And it's kind of, I mean, I'm always saying, the Bible is such an immense book. Even your problems with the Bible have been given to you by the Bible. And in my head, I've kind of got this kind of picture of, you've got two different people standing, and there's one person that seems to be standing outside the church, and he's kind of yelling at the church and talking about some matter of the church that's out of whack and horrendous and should get with the times, and it's on the wrong side of history. But then you zoom out and you realize that actually the other person is just standing on a different bit of the church, and that actually all the things you assume when you critique Christianity are Christian. And that's just true in just 100 different ways. If you think that I could never be involved with Christianity because what about the Crusades? How dare anyone in the name of Jesus go and conquer another land and bring the sword? In order to say that, really, you've learnt from this guy who said, put away your sword. Those who live by the sword will die by the sword. Turn the other cheek. When you look at the Crusades, for instance, what do you notice about them? Well, from within a Christian worldview, the Crusades are an abomination, because how on earth can you, under the banner of the cross, which is the emblem of dying for your enemies, how can you sit under that banner and then kill your enemies? What do you call the Crusades from Christian perspectives? An abomination. But what do you call the Crusades when judged by the standards of Julius Caesar or Genghis Khan or Muhammad or any number of different, people who have, of course, expanded their kingdoms forcefully? What do you call them? well, business as usual, basically.
So, I mean, I guess if you were someone from the time of Jesus, you were a Roman, the idea of people, if you're a Roman, the idea of going and invading someone else by the sword wouldn't really have been particularly objectionable to you. That would be your bread and butter, I suppose, as a Roman. You wouldn't have objected off the back of that. So, very much like you're saying that the reasons we object to that is actually based on this assumption that is entirely wrong. But of course, that comes from the Christian faith. But it's how aware we are of those things, isn't it? That often we're standing on the shoulders of these things without even realizing it. So
yeah, it's the water we swim in. Is one of the other analogies. You ask one fish, how's the water today, and the other fish says, "What's water?"
It's water. Yeah.
But that leads to the second clip where I kind of asked Tom, given that this is the case, he's basically saying everything is Christian, even criticisms of Christianity are incredibly Christian. Doesn't that mean it's an unfalsifiable hypothesis? I put that question to Tom, and I thought his answer was quite interesting. It can be very difficult to disagree with your thesis, can't it, Tom? Because in some ways, a critic of Christianity comes and they give some critique of Christianity, and your response can be, "How very Christian of you." There is that kind of is your thesis unfalsifiable? Or if not, what would falsify it?
I mean, I think that it first it requires you, first of all, I think, to question your own assumptions. Like, this is why I've written the book. I was questioning my own assumptions, not allowing any, saying, where does this come from? Where does this idea come from? How saturated is it in assumptions that I haven't acknowledged? It's kind of bias training, I suppose. I think that when you do that, you're forced to acknowledge, or at least I was forced to acknowledge, that it's actually very, very, very difficult to stand outside the Christian influence, because essentially the West is Christian in the way that the Islamic world is Muslim. The way that radioactivity lingers in the air after a radiation leak, that it's just there. It's just, you breathe it in. You can't really help it. Now, of course, there are ways to. There are very different ways of seeing the world, and what's happening in India gives you one example of that. I think what's happening in China gives you another. In our own European history, we have the example of the Nazis, who absolutely repudiated not just doctrinal Christianity, as the French revolutionaries had done, as the Russian revolutionaries had done, but some of the most fundamental tenets of Christianity, among which, we talked about the image of Christ on the cross. That is about that is a profoundly visual statement of the notion that the slave will conquer the master, that the tortured will conquer the torturer, that the oppressed will conquer the oppressor, which the Nazis regarded as ridiculous. Everything that the Nazis were about was to reject that, and also, of course, they rejected what you just talking about, the idea of Genesis, that all human beings are created equally. The Christian refinement in Paul that there is no Jew or Greek. The Nazis completely thought that there were differences between Jews and Greeks, and they launched genocide on the back of it. So we do have that example, and so if we want to know what an un-Christian world looks like, we can, for starters, look at the Third Reich. What is it? The Nazis thought what they were doing was right. They didn't sit down and say, it's like the Mitchell and Webb sketch, "Are we the baddies?" They didn't think they were the baddies. They thought they were the goodies. They thought what they were doing was right for the German people. The fact that we have enshrined them as, literally demonic. We don't need Satan because we've got Hitler. We don't need hell because we've got Auschwitz. We don't need devils because we've got the Nazis. But we regard them as diabolical because we bring Christian frames of reference to their ideologies.
Yeah, I just think that's dynamite. You know, you ask Tom Holland to say what's the alternative to Christian civilization, and he's like, well, you could have the Third Reich, I suppose. It's quite a statement.
Yep.
And then, you know, and later on in the conversation, I tried to push him for a quote. You're saying it's either Christ or the pit. You're basically saying it's Christ or the pit. And he kind of backed off that, and he said, no, because, you know, even the Romans loved their children too, and they lived and laughed and loved and all that sort of stuff. True, but it's such a stark...
did the Nazis.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So that's his thesis, and you know, he kind of says to stand outside the Christian tradition is to line up with some people who every sensibility within us says are the baddies. But where do those sensibilities come from? Christianity. And I kind of think that Tom Holland historically is, in a sense, doing what people like Cornelius Plantinga and Alvin Plantinga and Cornelius Van Til kind of do apologetically, which is presuppositional apologetics. Now, for those who don't know what apologetics is giving a reasoned defense of the faith. And presuppositional apologetics is basically to say that in any conversation about the faith, what is more interesting to talk about is not the objection that is coming from the critic. What is more interesting is to stare at the shoes of the critic and to look at your own shoes, to look at the foundations that you're both standing on in order to have the conversation. And so a presuppositional apologist might, you know, in a debate about Christianity or something, say, well, isn't it interesting that you're appealing to reason, which is an immaterial thing? And isn't it interesting that you are claiming to be rational and to have a mind, and that we can both appeal to these transcendental properties that are immaterial in order to have a conversation? And they're constantly doing bias training on you, and they're constantly saying, for us even to have a conversation, what do we have to assume? And they're doing that philosophically and theologically, the presuppositional apologists. Tom Holland is doing it historically, and he's saying, well, what are the historical things we're taking for granted, and what are the cultural things that we're just taking for granted as we're having these conversations? And so, like, I do think there's a parallel in some senses, which is not at all to say that Tom Holland would be an apologist or be a presuppositional apologist, but just that instead of having the conversation that's just about the criticism, what Tom Holland really helps us do is to look at the foundations and to figure out what it is that we're assuming and what our biases are, even as we have the conversation. I just think that's a really fruitful way forward, actually, when you're trying to have a chat about the faith.
Yeah, because I guess sometimes in our conversations you can get so bogged down in the, you know, someone comes with a question, an objection, and it's easy to get bogged down in the detail of that, but without even thinking about it, we, like you say, they're building that objection on some kind of basis, which is effectively probably a Christian basis, because it's a Christian worldview. They've been shaped by the Bible, whether they've read the Bible or not. And just unpacking those things, you know, I mean, I think we've probably talked about this in terms of when we talk about good and bad and, you know, suffering and evil, C.S. Lewis, you know, and his crooked line and stuff, we must know what a straight line is to know something is crooked. You know, there are all these things we bring in a discussion like that, where we assume, you know, certain things are wrong and bad, but we're basing that on a kind of Christian worldview as to what we believe is good. And that, I guess that happens in lots of different spheres of conversation, doesn't it? So it's always good to kind of unpack those things. I mean, I hope it doesn't feel for the, you know, for someone who comes with a question, in a sense, it doesn't feel like you're dodging the question, to just be like, well, let's just take a step back from that. But I think it is important, though, to do that, because I don't think even most of us as Christians are aware how Christian our society is.
Right. But you're right. It is. It can be really wearisome. Like if you're on the other side of a presuppositional apologist, it can be really wearisome because whatever criticisms you come with, they're like, oh, how very Christian of you. And even as they're angered because they feel like their desire for justice and truth has been violated, and how very Christian of you to feel that. It just becomes. But is there something inescapable about where we are situated? And I think in one sense the postmodernists point that out and point that out quite well. That everyone is situated somewhere. When they make a statement, when they make a criticism, everybody is already oriented towards the truth in one way or another. They're already inhabiting a story. They've already got all sorts of biases and prejudices. And so if, as a first step, as Tom Holland says, we should be aware of that, then he's done us a service. Let's examine our foundations. It's kind of I see it having worked really, really well in the Jordan Peterson Kathy Newman interview. I was going to call it a debate. It kind of was a debate. This is where Jordan Peterson showed up on so many people's radar screens when Kathy Newman tried to get the gotcha moment out of Jordan Peterson over half an hour, and literally it was Jordan Peterson who got the gotcha moment. But for those who are unfamiliar, or even if you are familiar with it, I think the gotcha moment was exactly what we're talking about. Jordan Peterson was urging Kathy Newman to look at where she was standing as she was asking her question. And I think that is what made the moment so delicious. Let's have a look. Okay, well, Channel 4 have made a copyright claim against us using this tiny 90-second clip, which is ridiculous because these things can be critiqued and spoken about, and this is one of the most critiqued videos of all time, really. Well, certainly of the last 2 years anyway. So let me just read a transcript of what happened in the Kathy Newman-Jordan Peterson interview. Newman asked, "Why should your right to freedom of speech trump a trans person's right not to be offended?" Peterson, because in order to be able to think, you have to risk being offensive. I mean, look at the conversation we're having right now. You're certainly willing to risk offending me in the pursuit of truth. Why should you have the right to do that? It's been rather uncomfortable. Newman pauses and says, "Well, I'm very glad I put you on this part, ... Peterson said, "You get my point. You're doing what you should do, which is digging a bit to see what the hell is going on, and that is what you should do, but you're exercising your freedom of speech to certainly risk offending me, and that's fine. More power to you as far as I'm concerned." Newman, so you haven't sat there and ... I'm just ... I'm just trying to work out... I mean... Long pause. Peterson says, "Ha, gotcha." Newman, you have got me. You've got me. I'm trying to work that through my head. Yeah, it took a while. That is the clip, which Channel 4 does not want us to show. Okay, back to the show.
I do love that moment where she pauses there. And it's like, error 404, an unexpected error has occurred. Please restart your computer.
Exactly. And what was the error? The error was, he said, "Let's have a look at the conversation we're having," right? So Jordan Peterson was not just saying, let me just answer the words coming out of your mouth. It's, let's have a look at the environment of the conversation we're having. And he was like, well, let's look at where you're standing, Kathy Newman. You're a journalist. You're digging around trying to get the truth. And you're saying things which could be offensive. But that's what you should do as a journalist. You're pursuing truth and you're risking being offensive. And that's all I'm saying, says Jordan Peterson. And I think that is the source of this cognitive kind of blow up that happened in that moment. I think he was doing presuppositional apologetics on it,
Yeah.
Not just dealing with the words coming out of her mouth, but understanding where she's standing and understanding, the beliefs that she already holds in order to make the criticism that she's making. So A little plug. I don't pin me down as a presuppositional apologist, because I'm not. I use whatever is to hand. They always say in military strategy that a plan gets you into the battle, but once you're in the battle, all bets are off. You use whatever is to hand, but I think as I survey the scene of interacting with the questions of those outside the faith, I very much value the insights of those who are presuppositionalists. But yeah, I'm not solely a presuppositionalist. Once I get into the fight, I'll use whatever tactic, which probably makes me unscrupulous. But yeah, so those were two clips from Tom Holland. We saw his thesis unpacked in a minute, and we have questioned, really, is his thesis unfalsifiable? But we've also got a great little clip about original sin, and I think he brings something very interesting to the table as he discusses original sin in this little bit.
I think that one of the very profound shifts since the 60s has been a reaction against the doctrine of original sin. And in the 60s, the idea that we are all born with sin was seen as a kind of repellent. And so we've in a sense become Pelagian, or Augustine's doctrine of original sin. He formulated in the context of a disagreement with a British theologian called Pelagius, who argued that we can become perfect through our own efforts, that it is possible to become perfectly virtuous. And I think that there is a sense in which, in its more radical manifestations, those who condemn sin in others are reluctant to contemplate that they too may share in sin. There is a kind of Pelagian sense that it is possible to become virtuous, completely virtuous. And in a way, I think that the doctrine of original sin stands as revealed as something that is profoundly democratic. Because if we're all sinners, then we're all at fault. And you can tell other people to take the beam out of their eye, but you should be aware of the fact that you have a mote in your eye as well. And if you don't have that, then you feel all the more qualified to sit in judgment on those who you feel have failed to kind of emancipate themselves from sin. And in a way, you then become the anti-theist stereotype of a kind of persecuting, judgmental person who refuses to accept that the person you're sitting in judgment with, that you are bred of the common stock of humanity. We're all, in that sense, in Augustinian terms, we all share in the same sin. We all share in the same fall.
What did you like about that, Paul?
I think I think he's bang on the money, really. Like, it's particularly when you think about kind of the modern day culture wars, you can see this thing springing up, can't you, of kind of, well, one side, if you're on, I believe a certain thing, we are the ones who are the good ones, and then people on the other side, therefore they are the bad ones. And we often use the phrase, don't we, like, you either agree with me or you're worse than Hitler. It's that kind of thing, isn't it? There doesn't seem to be any kind of middle ground. There's just good and there's terrible. I think, it's interesting what he says in there about the Augustine and Pelagius, this idea that, we've sort of imbibed this idea that we can make ourselves morally good. And therefore, if we look at someone and we don't deem them to be morally good, it's because they must be worse than worse. They must be worse than us. We're morally superior, for we have obviously climbed up higher than them in making ourselves virtuous. So I think, it's interesting. He uses original sin there as a leveler. And actually, I've seen a few people in the comments section talking about that they've been struck by this idea that actually original sin is profoundly kind of democratic in some way, that it kind of puts everyone on the same level. Rather than it being a kind of oppressive thing, it makes us all examine ourselves. I mean, it's interesting, he says, doesn't he, that often those who are, at the most extreme at least, those who are quick to condemn sin in others are reluctant to consider that it might be in themselves, but yet actually under the banner of original sin, we can certainly point to sin in others, but we must be aware of, the plank in our own eye, compared to perhaps the speck in others. So I think that's really, really relevant, just like I say, particularly given the mood of the day and the way we're dividing kind of more tribally and along different lines like that. And very, very much does seem that people believe there are those of us who believe this, we're the good ones. If you disagree, you're in the bad camp. And so,
Yeah. And so it's a theological problem. We're siding with Pelagius rather than Augustine. And, you ask most people in the streets, are you more Augustinian or more Pelagian? No one's got any clue. And yet we are being swept along in all these sorts of moves. And we do tend to. We've still got the Christian notion of there's good and there's evil, and there are those who need to be cancelled and those who need to be, cast outside the camp and excommunicated and all those sorts of things. But we've lost this notion that the chief problem is me.
I think as well, when you take away original sin, or this idea that we're all kind of in this boat, I think somehow it also takes away the ability for redemption. Because, I suppose when you feel that everyone's a sinner and we all have this same sickness, we can see, can't we, that, well, God can redeem people out of that. Because he's redeemed, he's redeemed me, he's redeemed you, he's redeemed the church and these people who are Christians. Whereas, if you just believe, if you don't believe that you're the sinful, if you believe you're just virtuous people, it's easy to see how you can very quickly just see other people as irredeemable in every way.
And you start to get really nervous because you're like, well, I'm on the right side of history right now, but what about in 5 minutes and then in 10 minutes, and when things shift.
And I think one of the things that original sin does, or when you take that out, is it makes it quite difficult for people. If you think there are those of us who are good and there are those of us who are bad, I mean, we obviously know that just it doesn't work like that in real life, that there are people who hold views that we definitely agree with, but yet they may have something as well that we disagree with. And there are people who we strongly disagree with who do things as well and believe things that we also agree with. And it's not as black and white as kind of just good, bad. But it makes it quite tricky for people to know what to do with those kinds of people. We don't have a space for kind of, that nuance of how, how do you deal with someone whose views largely line up with yours, but there's something in there you're uncertain about. And I think that's a struggle for, particularly in the culture wars today, where we see it just amped up, to 11, don't we?
So what do you do with Churchill? What do you do with George Washington? Both of whom were men of great integrity and character, and both of whom, Washington, when he died, freed his slaves, but didn't free his slaves, during his lifetime. Churchill said some stuff which I wouldn't ever want to say about different races. But are we able to have a view of people that is rounded and says that they are not the enemy and I am not the enemy, but something of the enemy lurks within me, and something of goodness lurks in them?
Well, that helps you, doesn't it, as well, to think, could there be something lurking in me? If you don't believe that can be the case, then you're very unlikely to think critically about what your positions on things, and be open to challenge, and I can think of some discussions I've had with people where I've tried to say, look, I think you're making some good points on this. I think your motive in why you believe X, Y, and Z is this good thing. And I think, you obviously know that's a good thing, and I know it's a good thing, but I think in the process of chasing that good thing, you're also causing this bad thing. And I don't think you're really opening your eyes to that. You want to get rid of injustice and oppression, but yet in doing that, you're creating another form of injustice and oppression. And I think if people aren't open to the idea that they could be fallible and making mistakes too, if they just think we're the morally virtuous ones, then it's very difficult for them to hear that side of it and be open to considering that. So
yeah. And one other thing to say on original sin before moving on is that people like Jordan Peterson sort of make something out of it, and people like Douglas Murray, and as we've said, you know, our first three interviews in Reset, they've all mentioned original sin. I think the danger, though, is I think people think of original sin as though I'm born in error, I'm on the wrong side, and I need to work my way back into God's good books, you know. So it's a kind of an Adam and Moses account of salvation.
Right.
You know, I'm born in exile, but if I obey the law, then I'll get back. Or, you know, or if I just, if I just use the right structures around me, then I'll kind of ascend the ladder. But that's not right. It's an Adam and Christ Christology and doctrine of salvation that we have. So that, yes, we're born in exile, but that's precisely where Christ comes to meet us. I often sort of put it as the Anne Forbes thing. So my great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother, Anne Forbes, stole 10 yards of printed cotton from a London market, and she got transported to Australia. And so one of the reasons why I'm Australian is because one person centuries ago committed one crime, she was exiled, and I now have been born far from the mother country. And if the whole goal of my life was then to get back to England, then you might think it's really unfair that I'm kind of born in Australia and I've got to scrimp and save and earn and, you know, save up for a plane ticket, and then I work my way back to the mother country. That would be an Adam and Moses doctrine of salvation. The real doctrine of salvation would be like Anne Forbes gets exiled to Australia, and then the king decides to emigrate. And he puts himself into Australia and, you know, makes that into his kingdom, so that he meets Anne Forbes and he meets the descendants of Anne Forbes in the place where they are born, so that all they need to do is acknowledge his rule and they're in. And that's what Adam and Christ is. You know, I'm born into sin, but that's the one thing that qualifies me for Jesus, right? Because that's the only thing I contribute to my salvation. What do I need? What do I need in order to get saved? Oh, you need to be a sinner. Good news, you are one.
Yeah.
That's your birthright, baby. You know. So actually, original sin, I think, is even better news than what some of the more cultural Christians are saying it is. Yeah. That's just a little caveat to say. And then, you know, let's get to the meat of the Tom Holland interview, because right at the end, I kind of ask him about his own faith journey. And he describes how he has lost faith in the old secularism. And is he discovering a new kind of faith? Let's have a look. We spoke back in November, and I said there are lots of Christians praying for you, Tom, and you said keep the prayers coming. So in the last year or so, where do you find yourself as you consider, you know, that one on the cross? Do you think of that as a kind of a dead end in terms of the end of a story? You're in the valley of the shadow, and that's that. Or do you think he might be a doorway through to hope and peace and joy?
I think that well, I've said that I've realised that all my the kind of the liberal assumptions I had float on faith. That without faith they have no you know, they have no validity. So essentially, I have lost my faith as you know, as a liberal. I've lost my faith. I don't really believe in it. But in my gut, I still do. I have no objective reason for thinking that anything that I thought as a liberal is true. I don't believe that human rights objectively exist or anything like that. I don't objectively think that there's anything in the arc of history that suggests that the strong won't crush the weak. That powerful states won't enslave parts of the population that they want to enslave. I mean, all of these things, And so does that open up a kind of existential abyss? Kind of. But what it also does, and I'm speaking entirely for myself here, is that because I now understand where my beliefs and values came from, that rather than just drown completely beneath a kind of despair, I can cling to stories. And I think that ultimately the power of Christianity is expressed most potently through its stories. And those stories are not just in the New Testament, but in what Christians call the Old Testament as well. And those stories don't have to be literally true. So the Exodus doesn't have to be literally true for the story itself, in my opinion, to be true. So I think that certain stories have such a power that you can surrender to them. And so essentially that's what I feel that I'm doing, is that I've surrendered to the truth of the stories, and therefore of the kind of the poetry and the mythology that they express. And I'm happy to identify myself with the truth of those stories and to see them as true in a kind of a moral, a poetic, a mythical sense. And I realised that the whole issue of whether I think they, are they literally true? Did Moses literally part the Red Sea? I've just decided I'm not worrying about that.
Yeah.
Because I think the power of those stories is sufficiently great that I can say, well, I'm going to believe in them.
What did you make of that, Paul?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, obviously, when he talks about he's lost his faith in liberalism. I mean, it's clear to see that he obviously realizes that a lot of the things he still holds to believe, his values and things, whilst I suppose those haven't hugely changed. It's just he sees that the foundations that he thought were there were not there. I think the thing I came away from those comments at the end was just unclear still exactly what he did make of Christianity, in the sense of surrendering to the story. If he's saying, does this need to be literally true? I think the thing I would really like to have heard from him is, to be just pushed on. Do you think Jesus literally rose from the dead? Because I think for us as Christians, and I think Tom must know this as well because he's done quite a bit of reading. We know that it all hinges on the resurrection, don't we? If Christ is not raised, then we're to be pitied above all men and so on. So I'd be really interested to know what he thinks about that. I think, it's just interesting to try and get to try and work out what he really means by surrendering to the story, I think. Yeah. So I'm still intrigued as to where he's at exactly.
Yeah. And the story is true, and it has the most incredible power, and you can submit yourself to it, whether or not you think it happened or not. And then the example he kept on returning to was, did the Exodus happen, and did Moses really part the Red Sea? Which he knows isn't the center of the story. He knows where the center of the story really lies. And, last year I was at a lecture that he gave in Cambridge, and Julian Hardiman, who's the pastor at Eden Baptist Church in Cambridge, was there, and asked him a question, which I've got the text of it here. During the Q&A, Julian asked, I wonder how far you think the cross of Christ will have genuine potency without an historical resurrection. To put it conversely, belief in an historical resurrection is what gave the Christian message such extraordinary attractiveness and power, because it meant that they might kill you, but you'd be raised again. Whereas without an historical resurrection, that promise seems a bit thin. And this is how Tom Holland responded. This is a year ago. He says, yes. And that's what Paul says. Without it, there's nothing. If Christ is not risen from the dead, it's folly, and all our hopes are vain. Absolutely. It's the historical specificity of it that makes ideas that it's just a recalibration of Adonis or Osiris so ridiculous. It's the fact that it's rooted in historical specificity, and without that, there's nothing. And then he moved on. So he knows that when he's submitting himself to this story, this historicity matters.
Yeah.
You know, Exodus, less so, but did Jesus rise again from the dead? He knows that it really, really matters that it did happen or not. But I just wonder, I think what he points towards is here is an avenue for discussing the resurrection with people that's not limited to the 5 minimal historical facts about the empty tomb. Which can be a quite barren way to have a conversation. You know, do you believe in the resurrection or not? I think one thing that evangelicals default to when they're having that conversation is let's describe what the minimal facts are. Jesus of Nazareth died on that cross. You know, the tomb really was empty. They knew where the tomb was. They had experiences of the risen Jesus. You know, and so you kind of you talk about what all historians of all stripes will agree to. And then you say, and the only, feasible explanation of that is that Jesus did in fact rise. I think there's definitely a place for all of that. But I do think what Tom does, first of all, is even more necessary. Because what Tom does is he says, okay, the victim on that cross has proved himself to be the victor in history. Like, over the course of 20 centuries... the victim really has proven himself to be the victor. That makes you think, doesn't it? And he gets you that far, and I think that is a very long way along the route towards faith, to say that the victim really has proved himself to be victor in history. The next step is to say, the reason why the last 20 centuries have unfolded the way that they have is because in the first century, the victim really was the victor. So I think he points the way towards a good conversation about resurrection, but he doesn't quite nail his colours to the mast there.
No, maybe not. But who knows? Maybe he will. He's certainly moved a long way since he started thinking about Dominion as a project. So who knows?
Yeah, who knows? And he's been so very transparent and open about his journey, and he's shifted. I mean, who actually changes their mind on things, and who actually changes their mind on things as a published author? You know, going down one route and now saying, actually, as an historian, the narrative that I bought into, the Edward Gibbon, idea that the church kind of, held humanity captive through the Dark Ages, and then wonderful secularists liberate it into light. He was like, that is the dominant thing that I believed and wrote about for years. And bunk him.
Yeah. Right. Sure. So
he's shown himself very willing to change, and he's a work in progress, as are we all. So if you guys haven't checked out the Tom Holland interview, then the links will be in the description below, and do check out the one that I had with him back in 2019 as well, because I think he dropped some excellent truth bombs at that stage as well. The next Resets interview is going to be with Miroslav Volf, Professor Miroslav Volf, who, among other things, is the author of Exclusion and Embrace, one of the great Christian classics on conflict and a gospel answer to global conflict. And we talked together about Cain and Abel and other kinds of stuff, and it's a terrific conversation. I loved my time with Miroslav Volf, so check that out on Friday. And if you are not already subscribed, you know what to do. If you're on YouTube, just go and hit subscribe and click on the bell so that it will notify you of the new stuff that's coming out. And what are some other ways that people can keep in touch with us, Paul?
Yeah, well, you can follow us on social media. So Speak Life UK can be found on Facebook and on Twitter and on Instagram. And then, of course, you can always go onto our website. I think it's speaklife.org.uk/sign up. I think you'll be able to sign up to our weekly emails as well, just to keep on top of stuff. But that'll give you a number of different ways. Whatever your kind of chosen method of delivery is, we'll be able to reach you through those.
Excellent. And I guess this time next week, will we be back in the studio? We might be.
With any luck, as long as I get a result that says I'm I'm negative, then
Yes.
I should be good to go.
COVID allowing and
Very
Lord
soon.
willing and all those other caveats.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Awesome.
yeah.
Cool. Well, you guys have a great week, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.